will stay in prison. The convicted killer's parole denied this morning after a hearing in Montgomery. Neelley is serving a life sentence for her role in the kidnapping, torture, rape, and murder of 13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken back in 1982.
Yeah, WVTM 13's Dan Odell was in Montgomery for today's hearing and joins us with the details.
After hearing testimony, the Alabama Board of Pardons and Paroles took only about a minute in executive session to make the decision. Judith Neelley's parole denied.
It's very hard knowing what happened here, and it's cringeworthy.
13-year-old Lisa Ann Milliken was kidnapped from a mall in Rome, Georgia in 1982 by Judith Ann Neelley.
I mean, Judith Neelley was actually only 4 years older than my sister. My sister was 13, she was 17.
Judith brought Lisa to the Five Points Motel in Scottsboro, where she was kept in room 12 for multiple days. Judith tortured and restrained Lisa while Judith's husband, Alvin, raped her. Judith said in court that Alvin forced her to commit these crimes, but investigators of the case told us they had no doubt that Judith was the ringleader.
She's not a good person.
Hey everyone, Keto Comic here. Welcome to the very first Sunday, Bloody Sunday. Today we're going to look at a case that's near and dear to my heart because as a child this case terrorized me because it happened in all the places around my hometown in Northeast Alabama. So it's definitely one that resonates with me. I was a young child, elementary school age child. Scared the bedickens out of me because I really thought the Neelleys were going to come get me. I mean, so it's definitely one that resonates with me. So I hope that's why I chose it to be the very first Sunday, Bloody Sunday. So let's get into it. Alvin and Judith Ann Neelley, Deadly Romance. Not only is this a story about criminals, hardened criminals, it's a story of a descent into delusion. These were two individuals that likened themselves to Clyde Barrow and Bonnie Parker. They really thought they were on the side of, they were going to make their mark by being criminal fugitives. Unfortunately, it didn't turn out too well for them, and unfortunately, they did take lives as a result. But let's get into their background. This is Alvin Howard Neelley Jr., born July 15th, Tryon, Georgia, 1953. He died at the age of 52 in Milledgeville, Georgia, 2005, because he was serving a life sentence for the crimes we're about to talk about. There's not really a whole lot on Alvin's background other than he was a small-time criminal. He did things like arson, burglary, shoplifting. He had been in and out of jail most of his teenage life and was actually married about the time he met the other and the main perpetrator of these crimes, which we're going to talk about in just a minute. But he was a small-town thug. And the whole persona is, the whole theory is that if it weren't for Judith Ann, none of these crimes would have ever happened. Alvin would have stayed a small-time criminal. He would have simply been in and out of jail and out of the system his entire life, and most likely no one would have ever died. But she, the rumor is, kind of brought the demons out of him, and so he turned into a hardened rapist and killer. This is Judith Ann Adams, later Judith Ann Neelley, born June 7th, 1964 in Murfreesboro, Tennessee, and that's even more of a brain drain for me because I live about an hour from Murfreesboro right now. So this case all around hits close to home for me. Judith was a troubled child. Her trouble started at the age of 9 when her father was killed in a motorcycle accident. And her happy Ozzie and Harriet blue-collar existence kind of went away at that point. Her mother ran through the life insurance that her father left and then turned to the oldest profession, prostitution, to make ends meet, and Judith was a witness to all that. So as a result, she started shoplifting, just being a troubled teen, spent some time in and out of the juvenile court system in both Tennessee and later on in Georgia. So she showed signs of being very mentally disturbed. I don't know if you've ever seen that old movie, Demon Seed, Evil Seed. Demon Seed's one about a computer, but Evil Seed is a story about a person that was born evil and ended up being evil even as a child. So I believe Judith Ann Neelley is a stereotypical sociopath, and it just evolved. But she met Alvin at the age of 15 in 1980. He was 26 years old. Remember, this is 1980s in the South, y'all. Sometimes the rules didn't apply. My own grandmother got married at the age of 13. I didn't say that was right. I don't like it, but it's just the way things were. So they ended up dating and actually eloped when Judith Ann turned 16 later on in 1980 to Trenton, Georgia, and that was the hot spot when I was growing up for getting married and for getting all kinds of quick licenses and quick things like that. So 1980, and eventually they would have 3 children, a set of twins and a younger child. All 3 of those children would be born in police custody. So think about how long this young lady spent in prison. Now, she was arrested for the murders we're going to talk about at the age of 18, and she's been in prison ever since. So this is literally a person that has spent their entire life in the system. Do I think that's the system's fault? No, I think she was just an evil person. But just to give you an idea of the background and her mentality and how she was very definitely a sociopath that had little or no regard for human suffering or human feelings. So, as I said, Judith Ann Neelley spent some time in the Rome Youth Detention Center, RYDC, for shoplifting and for assault, for some other things as a teenager. And according to people that knew her, people that knew about the situation, said that she was both physically and sexually abused within that detention center. And you know what? I'm inclined to believe that she did, because when you put troubled kids together with little to no supervision, because I'm sure those people are stressed and things like that, things happen. So she was probably abused by both other prisoners as well as staff, I would imagine. So she went through a lot there. I'm not saying that's an excuse for doing what she did, but that is background on it that's important. So after her and Alvin got married, they started out kidnapping. They started out kidnapping, shoplifting, armed robbery, and then graduated up to rape and murder. But their very first crime of record, when Judith was not a juvenile, that is under the age of 17, a man in Rome, Georgia by the name of Ken Dooley was shot 4 times through a window in his house, September 10th, 1982. Police were called. He did survive the shooting. He was asked if there was anybody that he knew that might have a vendetta against him or might want him dead. He could not answer. He said, no, I don't know of anybody that would want me dead. I don't have any enemies. So they chalked it up as, of course, a crime. And they decided to they started investigating it. Well, later that night, so that happened on September 10th. September 11th, at midnight, just a few hours after Ken Dooley was shot on September 10th, it ticked to September 11th. That's just a date that has a lot of connotations, isn't it? Now, literally, just a few hours later, Linda Rideau, who lived just across town from Mr. Dooley, her house was firebombed. And if you don't know what a firebomb is, it's a jar with an explosive material in it. Usually some of the stuff used to make fireworks or dynamite is in there. They put a rag in there, they light it, they throw it, it causes an explosion. Her house was firebombed. And she called the police. They again asked her the same questions, because Rome, Georgia is a very small town. And in the 1980s, for this kind of crime to be happening, I'm sure it shook a lot of people up. So, and they investigated it, and again, asked her the same questions. Have any enemies? Anybody that you have a beef with? She couldn't think of a person. Well, the very next day, a phone call came in to the Rome Police Department, and it was recorded. And I'm going to play you a dramatization of that recording so that you can hear it.
They are both going to die.
So this person, whoever it was A, not smart enough to know they record police calls, and 2, not smart enough to use a phone outside of their own neighborhood, which will come back to haunt them later, but basically took credit for the shooting of Ken Dooley and the firebombing of Linda Rideau's house, because they both had one thing in common. They worked for the Georgia juvenile system, particularly the Rome Youth Detention Center, where her abuse allegedly took place. So those were their first crimes. After that, they went back to shoplifting, armed robbery, reckless driving. Think of any kind of the myriad of small crimes that a person could commit. They were doing that from September 11th to about the last of September 25th especially. This is where the crime that would put Judith Ann Neelley on Alabama's death row would come in. And this is why, as a 7-year-old at that time, I was so scared of Judith Ann Neelley. Because this happened to a young child, not much older than me, which just makes it all the worse, and happened near my home. But September 25th, 1982, there was a group of young children in and around Rome, Georgia, that were there from a group home. Lisa Ann Milligan, this is her pictured here, like a lot of children, didn't have the best growing up. So she was in the foster care system. Her parents were eventually trying to get her back, and they eventually got her brother back, but she was in a youth home for not troubled children, but just children who didn't have the best home life, and they had to get them out of there. So there's a lot of rumors that flew around that she was a troubled child, that she willingly went with Judith and Alvin. No, that wasn't the case. She was just a kid that had a hard break, was in foster care in a group home, and happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. So they had taken the children to a mall near Rome, Georgia, and that's where Judith Ann and Alvin Neelley first caught sight of Lisa Ann Milligan. Like I said, she was 13 years old, and they struck up a conversation with them. And eventually she did wander off from the group that she was with and left with them. They took her to a hotel in Scottsboro, Alabama, and over a period of about 48 hours, they repeatedly raped and beat her, both of them. There was a lot of evidence that both of them got off. They had a kink for, and they were sadists. They had a kink for inflicting pain and agony on another person, and that gave them a sexual release. So that's what came out, and that's, if you look at all their crimes, that's sort of the pattern. They would not just kidnap and kill. They would kidnap, rape, torture, and then kill. So imagine this poor child locked in what was probably a flea-ridden motel, because I've been to Scottsboro, Alabama, and no offense to anybody that's there, but it's not the big city. Trapped in this dingy, awful motel, being repeatedly beaten and raped by these two individuals. So then Judith Ann decided she was going to conduct a little bit of an experiment on Lisa Ann. Instead of just shooting her, which would have probably been the most merciful thing they could have done, they injected her over a period of hours, several times, with the ingredients that go in Drano and liquid plumber. They injected this into her veins. Now think about it. This stuff takes crud out of drains. It's very caustic material. So she, according to experts, was literally on fire. Just to give you an example, here's what would happen if you just put a caustic substance like liquid plumber or Drano on chicken. Can you imagine what it's doing to the inside of this young girl's body?
And pretty much make them into salt molecules.
As you can see, it's just literally eating it away. So as you can see what it did to that chicken wing in just a few hours. Imagine it being injected into a human person and the absolute agony she had to be in. but she didn't die. So they eventually got so frustrated with her, they drove to 30 minutes from my hometown in a town called Fort Payne, Alabama. There's a national park there called Little River Canyon. They injected her one more time. When that didn't kill her, Judith Ann told young Lisa Ann Milliken, who was in pain and agony, to stand at the mouth of the canyon. It's a big canyon. So think of it as a very, very small Grand Canyon. And she shot her in the back and let her fall over the canyon. But her body didn't fall completely down the canyon. It landed on the little ledge just below the ground there. So Judith Ann Neelley had to get on her hands and knees in the meantime, cutting up her jeans, getting blood all over her jeans because of the blood on the ground, and physically had to roll her over the side of the canyon to get her out of sight, out of mind. And then about a day later, a call came in to Fort Payne police. A woman with the same kind of voice that was on the kind of like on that recording we listened to, and told them that if they would investigate Little River Canyon, they would find a body, and it might lead to solving of the disappearance of the little girl in Rome, Georgia. So as you can see, Judith Ann, and at least Judith Ann, I don't know if Alvin had anything to do with that, but at least Judith Ann wanted to be famous for doing what she's doing, which makes her a very, very dangerous person, in my opinion. So, it was maybe a week or so later, they're back in Rome, Georgia, and their second and third victims come into their crosshairs. John Hancock and Janice Chapman were a young engaged couple in their early 20s. They struck up a friendship with Judith Ann and Alvin and decided to go for a drive. So they're driving through, they go on the outskirts of Rome, Georgia, and they stop the car. Alvin says he needs to go to the bathroom, so John says, oh, I'll go too. So they all get out of the car, but Alvin comes up behind Janice and grabs her. And then Judith pulls the gun on John Hancock and walks him into the forest. They walk for about a half mile or so, and Judith shoots him in the back. He falls down and plays dead, and that's going to come into a huge factor later on. He plays dead. She leaves. They take Janice Chapman to a hotel nearby, probably another flea-bit one like they did to Lisa Ann, and over a period of days, they rape, torture her. And then they take her to a scrapyard, which is just a place where they keep old vehicles, old, furnishings, things like that are, too big for the normal dump. They'll take them to a scrapyard. So they take them to a scrapyard. They turn her around and they shoot her in the back. And, yeah, that's the kind of sadistic assholes we're dealing with here. But they weren't done. They took off from Rome, Georgia, and they went to Judith Ann's hometown of Murfreesboro, Tennessee, where they were staying with her mother, who's still hooking to make a living. And now, first I want to preface, I have nothing against sex workers, people that enter it willingly, nothing against that. It's a service like any other service. So I'm not shaming her for that. I'm just shaming her for the way she raised her child. I mean, come on. But anyway, so they're living in that environment, and then they make a trip out into rural Tennessee. They kidnap another young lady who shall remain nameless in this video. And they take her to a hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, and proceed. Now, bear in mind, their twin children are with them. So they are seeing this. That's another thing. There's no evidence that their two young twins witnessed Lisa Ann or Janice Chapman's demise. But this last victim, because this is the one for which they were arrested, or they were arrested in the midst of it, Their children were present. So they were present in this small hotel in Nashville, Tennessee, watching their parents torture and rape a young child. I mean, I don't see how you could keep them from not seeing it. I mean, especially if it's a one-room hotel. I mean, come on. So this is going on. In the meantime, John Hancock, after he's sure they're gone, manages to get up and run to the road and flag down a passing motorist, who takes him immediately to the emergency room. And while he's in the emergency room, he tells them that he's been shot. He knows he wants to talk to the police, and that they took his fiancée. So they patch him up. They're able to release him from the hospital, and he tells them he's going to the police station now. He doesn't want to wait for a policeman to come to him. He goes immediately to the Rome Police Department. He's walking in past the desk there in the main lobby, and he overhears in the back, because Rome's a very small town, so a very small police department, 2 homicide detectives listening to the recording of both the Dooley shooting and Dooley and Rodet shooting and firebombing recording, and that recording from the Fort Payne Police Department talking about young Lisa Ann Milliken's body being found at the bottom of Little River Canyon, because by now they have sent people in and they find her body. The first deputy that went in didn't find anything. They sent in another team, and they did find her body on the second attempt. And she was verified through dental records and other things to be Lisa Ann Milliken. So, as you can imagine, because she was from the Rome area, they thought maybe there was some connection between the two recordings. So these homicide detectives were literally listening to the recordings when John Hancock walks in the door. He walks through, he stops. He looks at him and he says, "That's the woman that shot me. I recognize that voice anywhere." So, of course, they immediately take his statement. They open the case on his unfortunately deceased fiancée, and they begin an investigation based on the parameters where they were. And they did locate the hotel. The clerk told them they saw the three of them leave, pointed them in the right direction, and they just went out and scoured the area, and eventually the body of Janice Chapman was found in that scrapyard near Rome, Georgia. In the meantime, they were able to lift some prints from the hotel room. They were able to lift some prints off Janice Chapman's body, as well as Lisa Ann Milliken's body. I mean, back then there was really no CSI. I mean, of course the trade existed, but DNA was in its infancy, so really all you had was fingerprints. And the little bit of DNA they were able to do takes days and sometimes weeks to come back. But they were able to glean some evidence from the bodies. And it was a match for Alvin and Judith Ann. She was Judith Ann Adams when she was arrested the first time, so it was a match. So they put out an all-points bulletin on them and eventually tracked them to the mother-in-law's house in Murfreesboro, Tennessee. They weren't there, so she told them she thought they had gone to Nashville. So they took off to Nashville looking for it and started running traces on small, out-of-the-way hotels, since that was their M.O., and they eventually found them, Judith Ann, in the hotel room with their last victim alive. She was the lucky one, and their 2 twin children, October 4th, 1982, and she was arrested. Alvin was not there at the time. He came back. He saw all the hullabaloo outside, and he took off, but eventually they tracked him down, and he was arrested a few days later on October 7th, 1982. So on October 9th, 1982, the two were transferred back to the Rome, Georgia area. Judith Ann, because they had her dead to rights for the murder of Judith Ann Neelley, because her voice was not only on the recordings, they also had her DNA, which was all over it. I don't know if they ever found Alvin's DNA on the body of Lisa Ann Milliken, but Judith Ann was sent to Fort Payne, Alabama, which was the county seat of DeKalb County, Alabama, where Little River Canyon was, and she was tried there. Alvin decided he was going to turn witness against Judith Ann because, of course, so he pled guilty to aggravated assault and murder in the case of Janice Chapman and John Hancock, but was never tried in any way, shape, or form for what happened to Lisa Ann Milliken. So Judith's trial began March 7th, 1983. Judge, this is what's so interesting to me, Judge Randall Cole, who actually presided over my parents' divorce. I mean, this is how close this was to me. Sentenced her, and her defense was insanity and being under the thumb of a domineering husband. That was her defense. And she had psychiatrists and all kinds of things bringing in saying that she had no control, whereas Alvin was in Georgia at the same time, testifying that Judith was in control. He testified in her trial in Alabama because that's the one they wanted. But Judge Randall Cole ended up sentencing her at 18 years of age to the electric chair in Alabama, and their third and youngest child was born while she was in custody for these murders. Alvin was sentenced to life in prison in Georgia for assault on John Hancock and attempted murder, as well as murder of Janice Chapman. He was sentenced to life, and he died in 2005, Bostic Prison in Georgia, the result of a surgery gone wrong. Now, I'm not, no conjecture there, who knows, they may have killed the asshole, but anyway, he died at the age of 52 in prison. Judith Ann Neelley, unfortunately, her death sentence was commuted by Governor Fob James in Alabama in 1999, and she is now serving life at the Julia Tutwiler Prison for Women in Wetumpka, Alabama, where she will never remain. Well, she will probably remain for the rest of her life because, as you saw from the intro clip, people don't want her out, and I can't blame her. And the brothers and remaining relatives of Lisa Ann Milliken are always present at those trials, so the chances of her ever getting out are slim to none. Their children were remanded to the adoption system, and they were adopted out, so hopefully they've had their names changed and they won't suffer from any of this, and I hope they were able to stay together. But that's it, guys. That's my first episode of Sunday, Bloody Sunday, the murders and life of Alvin and Judith Ann Neelley. A case that literally scared the bejeebus out of me as a child. So I hope you enjoyed it. I'm going to end this with an actual statement interview from the Judith Ann herself from Geraldo Rivera's murder special in 1988. So this literally was 5 years after she was sentenced. So we're going to go out on that. In the meantime, thank you so much. Like, comment, share, subscribe. These I hope will keep getting better. My videos in general will keep getting better. I'm learning as I go. Thank you so much. Ketosis, y'all. Keto Comic. Out.
It started with robbery, burglary, and forgery, and ended with abduction, rape, torture, and murder. In one short period of time, they killed 2 people. They left a third for dead. Tonight, Judy Neelley is on death row. She's one of the 2 women on death row in Alabama. Judy Ann, do you admit that you killed those 2 people and tried to kill the third?
Yes, I've never denied that.
In the case of Lisa Ann, the 13-year-old, you tell us how you killed her.
I'd rather not go into detail.
Let me help you then. The fact is that with your husband, you kidnapped the child. You allowed your husband, or witnessed and helped your husband as he raped her 4 times. You personally tried to inject her with Drano, liquid plumber, to kill her that way. When that didn't work, after several days of abuse, you shot her in the back, and then you kneed her over a cliff. Isn't that more or less true, Judy Ann?
Those are the facts, yes.
Those are the facts, right. Your defense is a unique one, as I understand it. You say that you did it because you were dominated and